I couldn't say no to this lady standing right here. I've never been able to say no to her, but I'm here really for another reason. Because I know you collectively, perhaps as well as any American, born American Jew in the United States. My whole life has been intertwined with the Jews in the Soviet Union, even as it began in my own home with my mother from Moscow and her mother from Babruysk and her father from Minsk, living next door to us. And I'm here to appeal to you. We are at war. It's as simple and as difficult as that one statement. We are at war. Nothing is the same. And we need all hands on deck. And there is this, I'll call it sleeping giant. Some 7 million Jews who live in the United States. Many have long been awake and active, including in the campaign Pustin Narod Moy. Many have been asleep. Some have been on long-term vacation from the Jewish people. All hands on deck. If that sleeping giant wakens to its full potential and capacity, we can accomplish a great deal. And I believe that while we speak of a war, in today's world there are 3 fronts to that war. Earlier in the Middle East, including 50 years ago, in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, there was one front in particular, the military front, on the Egyptian border, on the Syrian border. Bloody. Unpredictable in the first days. Then, as Israel's enemies morphed more from state to non-state actors, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the like, the second front in Israel in many ways became the first front, the home front, the civilian front, because this new war, or hybrid war as it's sometimes called, was really focused on civilians, on undermining the morale, the confidence, the resilience of the Israeli people, wearing them down, in a way encouraging them to leave, to give up this journey which began some 4,000 years ago. But then came the third front in more recent years. And the third front against the state of Israel and the Jewish people is the global front. It's the front that's taking place right here in this country, before our very eyes. What Dina said a moment ago about Times Square is not only about Times Square, nor is it only about Columbia University or Harvard University. It's an effort to create a force that will ultimately break the previously unbreakable bond between Washington and Jerusalem, between the United States and Israel. That is their goal. And it has been for many years. Doesn't happen overnight. We have built together a rather extraordinary pro-Israel voice in the United States. Not just among Jews, but among many, if not most, Americans. And you've seen the results of that since 1948. But something is changing. And it's changing rather quickly. And if we don't step up to that third front to ensure that this country continues to stand with the state of Israel through thick and thin, and I'm not here to make partisan comments, because I've never been a partisan, but you're not going to hear many speeches like the speech of President Biden yesterday. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, because it makes absolutely no difference today. None. Any more than to me it makes any difference if yesterday you were left of center, right of center, Haredi, modern Orthodox, conservative, Reconstructionist, Reform, American-born immigrant. Doesn't matter. It simply doesn't matter. We're either one or we're none. Israel answered that question for itself. Even 1 week ago, the only story we were hearing about Israel was polarization. The deep rift between those for and against judicial reform. The weekly demonstrations for month after month after month, the bitterness, the anger, the threats to democracy, you heard it all. As recently as 1 week ago. And 1 week later, miracle of miracles. Nes Gadol, the big miracle. The country is one. 300,000 people were called from Miluim, from reservists. Apparently not a single one, not one, did not show up. To the contrary, people who were not called up showed up, including a 91-year-old man, who you may have seen on social media holding a machine gun. And there are so many other stories of people in their 80s and their 70s, veterans of the War of Independence and of the 56 war, each reporting. And today, in Israel, there are no left and right, religious and secular, Ashkenazi and Sephardic. There's one. One country, one people, one body, one destiny. My question is, can we do the same here? So my goal in coming, accepting the invitation tonight, was not to come here and analyze. As the rabbi said, there'll be the opportunity later on, months from now, to analyze and to study, to better understand. All of us have 1,000 questions. And they're important questions, and they're good questions, and they're baffling questions. But they're irrelevant questions at the moment. For me, there's only one question as we gather here at Beth Sholom. One question. What are we going to do? Not what are you going to do, or you going to do, or they going to do. What am I going to do? Am I different today than I was 1 week ago? And if the answer is no, if tomorrow morning after this amazing turnout, you have to see it from the Bima, this amazing turnout in what, 24 hours or so, and I know there are people watching as well. If nothing changes tomorrow, then please forgive me. This evening will not have been worth your while or mine. Because we're not here to talk about some esoteric subjects of curiosity or interest. We're here to ask ourselves, in the midst of war, what is our role? And my answer is, we are the third front. Because the Tzava, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the home front in Israel are not going to be the ones to ensure that our political leaders, our elected officials, our mayors, our governors, our senators, our city council members, our state assembly members, our Senate members, our House members are going to stay with us through thick and thin. And our universities need to understand that we're watching them carefully, and we're not happy with much of what we see. So we have a battle on our hands, because I can tell you, and I've said this and believed this for many years, if ultimately our adversaries here prevail, the U.S. ambassador across the river at the United Nations has the one hand between legally enforceable sanctions against the state of Israel by the United Nations or not. One hand, one veto. And if that hand is not instructed by the White House to be raised, all bets are off. Well, let me put it a different way. The Yom Kippur War, which, as you know, was extended because Israel was caught by surprise and faced a formidable force on the Syrian border and on the Egyptian border. Israel desperately needed additional weapons and spare parts. In those days, the American Air Force cargo planes could not fly the full distance, nor could they refuel in midair. They needed to land. Now, the United States had many allies in Europe. We had military bases to defend many countries in Western Europe, NATO members. And by the way, we had many European countries who had told those of us who've been on the diplomatic front line, never again. Solemnly on January 27th, never again. We remember. Zachor. Lo tishkach. Do not forget. And they would look in our eyes and try and convince us. But when the rubber hit the road in October 1973, not one single European country volunteered to allow American cargo planes with American weapons to land and refuel. The United States quietly landed in the Azore Islands off Portugal, refueled, I think even before the Portuguese government woke up, and made it. And I ask you today, 50 years later, your level of confidence that if the United States were not deploying right now an aircraft carrier group off the coast of Israel, and if the United States were not beginning to send the weapons that Israel has asked for, precision weapons, who would fill that space? Does anyone have confidence that any other country would fill that space with either the political will or the military hardware, or both? I don't. This country is critical to the life of the state of Israel. And its role is irreplaceable, even as we celebrate the closer relationship between Israel and India, for example. Or the growing relationship between Israel and some Arab countries, or between Israel and several countries in Central Europe, or for that matter, even Germany, with which Israel just signed the biggest defense deal in Israel's history. But that's what's at stake right here in the United States. And you see the nature of our adversaries. They don't just hate Israel. They don't just advocate politically for the Palestinian side. They dance with glee and joy at the news of Jewish babies being beheaded. That's the nature of the enemy. And it's no exaggeration. They celebrate the cold-blooded murder, the bestiality, the brutality, the barbarism, the inhumanity. And did you see a member of Congress yesterday being chased by several media correspondents? A very simple question. It was not an elaborate question on finding a solution to the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a very simple question. Excuse me, Congressman Tlaib, do you approve or disapprove of the Hamas murder of innocent children and other Israelis? A very simple question. Should have an obvious answer. And by the way, she could say, I fully support the quest for a Palestinian state. It's her right. Even as I condemn the beheading of babies. She couldn't even say that. She couldn't even say that. An elected member of the United States Congress could not bring herself to acknowledge that babies be so brutally murdered, mutilated, paraded, and that children could be put in cages as trophies to be marched through the streets of Gaza. And for me, what's almost as scary to the brutality and the bestiality that we've seen, and to the celebration of that brutality and bestiality on our television screens in New York, and in the US Congress, and in London, and in Sydney, and elsewhere in what we've always believed are great countries, was a second group of people in this country, much larger, who simply say, when asked the question in chat groups, in offices, among neighbors, and I'm already getting a number of reports through my children and my children-in-law and their networks of deans of colleges, of principals of schools, of administrators of chat groups, who don't want to touch the subject, who kind of beg off by saying, it's too complicated for me. I don't want to get involved in controversial issues and other such euphemisms. These are otherwise decent people. These are not Hitler's willing executioners themselves. They would never in their lives think of hurting a 3-month-old baby, to the contrary. And yet when asked, they choose silence, or they choose even-handedness. Let's find the 50-yard line between them and them. And it doesn't seem to matter that them are animalistic, death cult, who find exhilaration and joy and emotional orgasm in the murder of the elderly, the young. By the way, not just Jews. The underreported story is that as many as 22 other countries are today suffering from the murder, the kidnapping, the wounding, including this country. But these otherwise decent people can't make up their mind between that death cult, that bloodlust, and those who are in their homes trying to raise families, seeking nothing more than a Beth Sholom, their own house of peace. And then, in a way, forgive me, but I have to draw the analogy. And I do so very reluctantly. One begins, even if one was not there, to understand much better the 1930s and the 1940s. We always ask that question, what did people know? And why did more people act? And now we see, in a way, human nature repeating itself in some important respects. There's no one who doesn't know. Not in this invasive world where we're smothered with information from morning till night and night till morning. There's no one who doesn't know. The problem is, what do they do with what they know? And if they choose not to get involved because it's too complex, where is the complexity in the mass murder of babies? And by the way, if I'm still with the 30s and 40s in mind, in the Shoah, the Nazis did their best in Babi Yar, in Belzec, in Treblinka, in Birkenau, in Auschwitz, to hide the evidence. There was even a special Nazi German unit that by 1943-44, as Berlin began to grasp that they might lose this war, was dispatched to destroy all the evidence, to burn all the evidence, to bury all the evidence. Here, in this death cult, they parade the evidence for the world to see. The level of cruelty is such, as you may have heard, that among cell phones, that Hamas terrorists, no New York Times, not militants, terrorists, no National Public Radio, not militants, terrorists, calling the family members who were on speed dial with Facebook and showing the images of their bloody, raped, murdered, mutilated family members to those back home in prayer, in mourning, maybe still in hope in some cases. Something has gone very wrong here. Some people have lost their moral compass entirely. And it's not for me now to try and analyze. I'm not here to analyze. I'm here to mobilize. But something has gone very wrong. And those students at Harvard and Columbia who got in may have high SATs or GPAs. But I can tell you that the admissions office missed the most important characteristics in their application. They missed their human qualities, their character. So bravo to the law firm in Washington that upon hearing the student from NYU Law School celebrate murder, mayhem, and mutilation, said in effect, F you, no job. And I want to suggest that this is the language that institutions have to follow. It's not enough for us today to stand up and say, you know, if it weren't for Israel, you wouldn't be eating cherry tomatoes. And if it weren't for American Jews, you would not have the polio vaccine. And you know what? We're really nice people, and the more you get to know us, the more you should appreciate us. We have to get strong. We have to find our spine. We are at war. So why am I here? I'm here because I know Russian-speaking Jews well enough from my own family, and since my first living experience in Moscow and Leningrad, Miendo, my exchange in 1974, when I lived and worked and taught in the Soviet Union. You are what we need. And Elena has heard me say this before October 7th, a year and 2 and 5 and 10 years before October 7th. For you, and I speak generally, of course, you know what anti-Semitism looks like. You know what it smells like. You know how the Soviet Union created the campaign of anti-Zionism, which led to the Zionism is Racism resolution of 1975. You, if you're old enough, remember Samuel Zivs and the Soviet Anti-Zionist Committee. And whether or not you choose to live in Israel, for most of you that I've known over the years, Israel is not an option. It's in your bloodstream. It's in your bloodstream. And you're not some of those fuzzy-headed, woolly-headed American Jews, of whom there are too many, who always want to believe in goodness and kindness and in peace and in coexistence and in dialogue. I don't say that to be cynical. It would be wonderful to live in a world in which we all were governed by kindness and compassion and dialogue and peaceful coexistence. But in the pursuit of those goals, how many American Jews have shown again and again and again their total misunderstanding of history? My mother, who never made it to finish high school, because after fleeing the Soviet Union, they arrived in Paris, and then came the Nazis. So my mother and her family fled and hid, like many in France, but she never finished high school. And when she came to America during the war, unusually, she didn't sit on or stand on line and wait for handouts. There were none. She went to work. And she worked until she was 83 years old. But my point is that my mother, without her high school attestat, understood the world far better than many of those Harvard and Yale so-called experts. Because she had lived life, she didn't study life. Because she had lived in the Soviet Union and understand the capacity for evil, and for deception, and for oppression, and for tyranny, and for anti-Semitism. And she had fled the Nazis who were this close to her, and their collaborators, the French Vichy. She knew what evil looked like, and smelled like, and tasted like. She was never under any illusion. You, collectively, are, if you will, the successors of my mother. And whether you have a daughter now, or you don't, and you haven't even finished high school, to me is completely irrelevant. You all have a PhD in life. In life. And that's exactly what we need right now. People who are smart and strong and tough and have a backbone and are not going to collapse at the first challenge or confrontation that there will be. And we know that even many who today support the state of Israel. A week from now, as the fighting goes on in densely populated Gaza, as Hamas cynically uses children, uses women, uses mosques, uses hospitals, uses ambulances, uses residential buildings to implant its leadership, its arms, its infrastructure. The pictures that you and I are going to see on media, including social media, are going to very quickly shift from what we've seen since Saturday to these new images. And it's already started. And I hate to give Hamas any credit, believe me, but they have been brilliant at public relations manipulation. The same image of the dead child has appeared from Syria to Gaza repeatedly. They know how to plant a beautiful, cute, stuffed animal amidst the rubble. So the camera crews rush to capture this adorable little Curious George or whatever, and then wonder on screen, where is the child who once held Curious George? They're brilliant at all of this media manipulation, and our job's going to get tougher. We know it a priori. And even some of those people who today say, I'm with you, Muslimi, will they be with us a week from now? 2 weeks from now? 4 weeks from now? 6 weeks from now, if God forbid this war is prolonged? Yet we know that Israel cannot shorten the war unless it deals a lethal, fatal blow to Hamas. And we know, though we will hear stories to the contrary, that Israel is among the most ethical and moral armies in the world. And that's not simply a talking point. Tell me how many armies in the world employ moral philosophers to grapple with the exquisitely difficult questions of when can you strike a Hamas leader and when can you not, if he's in a car surrounded by children or elderly or wives. These are the kinds of questions that have no easy answer. But Israel at least asks the questions and tries to find the best possible answers. So I believe, that we have not an important job to do, we have an urgent, essential job to do, and there is no one else to do it but you. And me. And that's why, Elena, I accepted to come here. Because I believe in you. I believe in you since I first arrived in Moscow in 1974. Спецшкола номер 45, станция академическая. Осторожно, двери закрываются. Следующая остановка академическая. I believe in you. And I'm here to say that the time for American Jews to say, what can we do for you? As if you were the poor cousins who arrived on the immigrant ships, is far, far, far over. Now the question has to be, what can you do for us? Even better, what can we do, Misti, Yachad? How do we achieve the Achdut, the unity that we absolutely have to have and that we see modeled by the state of Israel? And how do we ensure that not only we who are here, but our children who are perhaps not here this evening because they have school tomorrow, begin to understand, if they don't already, not just the facts and figures and dates, but most importantly, the why. The why. Why be Jewish? Why love Israel? Why be proud? Why stand tall? Why carry this tradition on your shoulders, on your watch, in order to pass it to the next generation and their watch? Why? That only happens in the family, and it obviously, Rabbi Asher, happens here in the synagogue. You're a very gifted teacher. But we need the home. We need the children. We need you. We need your voices. We need you to be in touch with politicians and elected officials. We need you on social media. We need you in chat rooms. And some will say, well, David, but I can't reach Joe Biden. What should I do? And I'm here to say, very few of us can reach Joe Biden or whoever's the president of the United States. That's not a political comment. It is to say that every one of us, every single one of us in this sanctuary can do something more than we did yesterday. And I'm not here to tell you what it is. I'm only here to urge you to figure it out for yourselves. If it's simply touching one person who wasn't sure of where he or she stands and maybe opening their eyes, if it's posting something in a chat room and generating a discussion where you move people in a certain direction, whether it's writing a note to Senator Schumer or Senator Gillibrand or to Governor Hochul or to Mayor Adams. And look, I know the politics of the Russian Jewish community. They're irrelevant. Today, you are not Republicans or Democrats, and nor am I. We're at war. In war, Winston Churchill made a pact with the devil named Joseph Stalin. And when asked, how could you do it? He said, we'll deal with Stalin later after we win the war. But first, we have to win the war. We're no longer Democrats or Republicans. We're no longer liberals or conservatives. We are the pro-Israel army at a time when our beloved Israel is at war. And there is a third front, and it's either us or we yield that third front to the Mishugoyim that we've seen on television, on social media, on our campuses, who celebrate and who sing as they see the bodies of slain Jewish babies. I wish you strength. I wish the IDF and the home front success. And I know that we will shoulder our load. History expects that of us. And we won't disappoint history, will we?